Welcome back to Mean Streets, where each week we investigate the best, worst, and forgotten movies of film noir.
I'm Luke Deckard.
And I'm Matthew Booth. And today's case is 2014's John Wick, starring Keanu Reeves and directed by Chad Stahelski. The tagline for John Wick is, an ex-hitman comes out of retirement to track down the gangsters who killed his dog and stole his car. And as far as plots go, that's pretty much it.
That is pretty much it. Now there's a secret director involved. So it's technically.
Let's tell us more on that.
It's technically co-directed. There's David Leitch. Both Chad and David co-directed this movie. So there's technically a second director, but he had to be labeled a producer because of
David Leitch, who did the Fall Guy.
Yeah, who did The Fall Guy and like Deadpool 2 and Atomic Blonde.
Yeah.
Yes, so they actually did this. They were a directing pair, but they weren't allowed to be labeled a directing pair because of it was Directors Guild of America rules. Basically, the rules wouldn't allow them to be co-directors, so apparently there's like a lot of difficulty for people who want to be co-directors. So things like the Wachowski brothers, now sisters, the Coen brothers, people like that, people who do co-writing, co-directing films. Apparently, you have to sort of like be an established team or something like that. Seems very murky and complicated. But yes, there were technically two.
Do we know anything on who? How much was it? Was it 50-50 or was it 60-40?
It sounds like it was 50-50. Right. It seems like they were there together all the time working on this from the beginning to the end. So it was definitely 50-50 from what I can tell.
Well, there are two directors who are well qualified to make a film like this, aren't they? Well,
both of their debut.
Yeah, well, what a good debut it is as well.
Seriously. There's debuts and then there's day effing views, and this one
this is the latter.
This is a day effing view. Like it's just I guess initial thoughts are quite obvious. I thoroughly enjoyed John Wick 2014. I think it's a fun, well-paced action romp.
That's exactly my thought. Yeah, it's a fun-paced action romp, and it really doesn't pretend or want to be anything other than that. I don't think. I think it is just a gutsy, exciting, violent action flick, and it ticks all of its boxes for me.
Yes, totally. And I think back to Chad and David, who directed the movie. Their backgrounds are perfect for this because, like in The Fall Guy, we told you about David Leitch. He directed The Fall Guy, and he is a stuntman himself. He had doubled for Brad Pitt and worked on all sorts of movies. But Stahelski is also a stuntman. He, interestingly enough, was one of the doubles on The Crow. So he was a stunt double for Brandon Lee. So when Brandon Lee tragically was injured and then eventually died from injuries on set, he was the one who completed the rest of the filming as Lee's character with special effects and digital effects superimposed over his face to make it look like Lee. So Chad was also the stunt double for Keanu Reeves in The Matrix.
Yeah, I was just going to say he was Reeves' double for The Matrix. So
yeah, long history of working in action movies, doing stunts, and this one, we're not going to go into the other movies, but this one compared to the other films and even movies like The Fall Guy, it's great action, but with a lot of restraint in some cases. Like if you compare it to The Fall Guy, which at times just sort of was OTT the entire time. A lot of fun, but OTT. This one held back going that far, whereas you get to other John Wick movies and he's falling down like 200 flights of stairs in one go and then walking away.
Yeah. They all go down that route, don't they? Bond goes down that route over the course of however many films it's been. I know what you mean. It's the action in this is whilst it's visceral and it is a pretty violent film, this
Definitely.
it doesn't overstep its mark, and I think it knows what its mark is very clearly, and it never seems to overstep it to me. And it's all restraint. I think it's probably the right word, but it seems an odd word to use in terms of the action in this film, because there is a lot of it. Once this film kicks into gear, it really never lets up. And I'm not sure you'd want it to let up, really. We like the Fall Guy, when that let up a little bit, it became a bit dull. I think we said in the episode, and there's none of that in this. There's just no time to be dull or distracted in this film, because it's one thing after another. And it's well shot, it's well made, it's well directed, and as far as I'm aware, most of it is Reeves himself.
Yeah, he does a lot of his stunts. He does a lot of his stunts. I mean, I just think the pairing, this directing duo, I'm gonna call directing duo, even though they don't get the credit. I'm gonna give them the credit in this episode, because I think they're a dynamic pairing here that makes all of that work so well. Because I mean, when I say restrained, what I mean is that it just doesn't. It goes far, and it goes into realms of unbelievability, so you kind of suspend disbelief to enjoy the romp. It just doesn't go Fast and Furious stupid. The action goes crazy. The action is crazy, and it pushes the envelope of what is like believable, but it doesn't do it all the time to where it's sort of in like the Jason Bourne sense. You sort of go along with it and buy it. So I appreciate that level of like realness to it. And John Wick, he is injured, and I like that he is injured.
I like
and
that
you
he's injured.
Feel the injuries persisting throughout.
I think that when you say push the envelope, I mean it does, but all action films do, don't they? But it never gets into the realms of a sort of a comic book for me. It never really transcends into that, people flying all over the place. It's grounded, and it's great stunt work, but it's not a Marvel film, and it's not an Indiana Jones film even. It's a pretty brutal and gritty action flick where the fight scenes and the stunts, you're right, they are Bourne-esque in the sense that you can buy their happening. You can buy that it's realistic, even though you know it isn't. And I think that's down to the way it's shot and everything. And these two will have known what they were doing, of course, in that. And will have known exactly what they wanted from it.
I think, like, speaking on the restraint, we talked about this briefly off air, but like, there's their first cut. So like the director's cut of John Wick was 2 hours and 20 minutes, which they then stripped back to 1 hour and 40 minutes. And I'm so glad that they did that.
Yeah, so am I.
Because
it doesn't need to be 2 hours. Doesn't need to be 2 hours, 20 minutes. You
can feel that in the pacing. You were mentioning earlier how it just, once it gets going, it just moves. This is a film that there's no fat on this script. It just everything is everything you're seeing, you need to see and needs to happen, and there's no dilly-dallying or dawdling around. It's just so laser focused, and I really miss this sort of tightness when it comes to action movies. I mean, it's another reason why I did like The Fall Guy, because The Fall Guy was more or less, it had a little bit of flab, not, but it was 2 hours, a simple 2 hours. Yeah. This an hour and 40. I miss those 1 hour 40, 2 hour. Like, we need more of this sort of stuff in the cinema.
Yeah, it's a common complaint for me. This that films don't need to be pushing 3 hours. They just don't. Some of the older films that we've reviewed on this channel and that are to come, they do what they need to do within sort of 80 to 90 minutes.
Yeah,
and they do it fabulously. The longer you film, the more bloated it runs the risk of becoming. And what we haven't quite got at the minute, in my view, is the skill or whatever it is that you need to make a 2.5 hour film not seem flabby, and not seem to have too many climaxes, because we've mentioned several films on this channel where you think, oh, the film could end here, and I wouldn't know any difference, or I wouldn't be sorry. Well, you don't get that. You don't get that with this, because you're right. This is as tight as they come, and it's a very simple premise. You know, the tagline is the story. That is the plot. You know, and it's a very satisfying plot to me.
Is. Yeah.
You know, the whole idea of being wronged and going out and getting your revenge is a really satisfying one throughout crime films and horror films. It's a really good setup, a really good starting point for a story. And essentially that is what happens in this. And I also like the idea of, you know, the spy coming in from the cold, who's got to do, he doesn't want to come back into the circus, as John le Carré calls it, but he's forced to because of circumstance. I always like that as a character trope. That always seems to me to be really satisfying. And in this, you get both.
Yeah, no, that's the thing with John Wick. I mean, you know, I can imagine there being individuals saying, "Wait, what? This isn't a noir movie." It's totally noir movie for all the reasons you just said. I mean, you have that perfect revenge plot of loner guy who has lost his loved one, or loved ones, including the dog, and goes on revenge to you know, avenge them, which is the plot of The Big Heat. But then you also have, like you said, the cold outside, you know, the spy came in from the cold, that sort of idea. I mean, that's the opening of Blade Runner. We need the old Blade Runner. We need the old guy back.
Yeah, absolutely.
You know?
Yeah. And it's you know, and it's Tinker Tailor Soldier Spy. It's all those. It's Smiley's People. It's all those things where they say, and it is the spy who came in from the cold. It is that one. You know, we need you for one last push. But in this, he's self-motivated to do it because of what happens to his loved ones, as you say. And so those two ideas, when they're put together, can be dynamite. They can fall flat, but they can be dynamite. And this is one where it works to a treat. And I agree, people will say it's not noir, but it absolutely is. It absolutely is, especially in those scenes where, I mean, it's darkly lit, isn't it? And it's a lot of it is about the shadows and the fight in the nightclub, and then there's a scene in the rain and all that bizarre. I mean, you're not telling me that's not noir. I think it's full on noir.
I mean, yeah. I mean, visually, it's definitely neo noir without a doubt. I mean, the scene in the nightclub, I love the nightclub that's under the Continental. That's so cool. The way the colors are in there are wonderful. The way the colors are in the Russian baths, you know, the cold blues at the beginning, and then the neon reds and the blues and the, you know, it's a very, very smoky, dark noir feeling movie. So visually, I mean, totally.
It is.
But before we get too much into the story, there's a few more things I think are interesting to let people know about, and that is there were issues with the, not the making of the movie, but with the distribution of the film at first. So one of the main producers apparently struggled to distribute the film. A lot of people were sort of apparently dismissive of the fact that it was just a action flick by first time directors. And another big issue was that a lot of films recently of Keanu Reeves hadn't done very well. The past, like, you know, I don't know, 8 years or so of his movies, you know, from, I don't know if Constantine falls into this, but some of that era, that 2005 to 9 period, he wasn't doing anything that was wowing the box office. People might like some of those films, but they weren't wowing the box office. So there was apprehension there. But you know what won? You know what? How it sort of started to win people over?
Go on.
The marketing. So, well. I mean, I remember when this came out. I vividly remember the marketing. I remember the posters. I remember the neon light John Wick. It popped everywhere you looked, and essentially what the marketing was doing, and this was you know, to its benefit, it was sort of trying to change the perception of what this film is. So, you see, you think of those movies that are like disposable action movies. There's like that movie with The Rock where he's some guy who has no legs, but he's like jumping. It's like jumping over some skyscraper to skyscraper, kind of like a Die Hard knockoff thing. That is a disposable, action comedy. 90% of comic book movies are disposable. But they wanted to make this feel like a prestige sort of event, right? And led by a damn good actor. And we've mentioned this before, where marketing has failed, whether the Nice Guys, whether it's the Fall Guy, marketing did not fail one bit with John Wick.
Not on this, no, not on this. And that poster is really good. I mean, in many ways, that says all you need to know. He looks. It's that blue lighting effect that is prominent throughout the film. Really, he's pointing a gun at you, which he does all the time in the film, and he just looks. He looks mean, but he looks cool. And it's a world away from the sort of Photoshop poster of the Fall Guy, which means nothing. And its simplicity is so much more striking than those like awful, overcrowded Marvel posters and Star Wars posters that we started to get. This is just, it's lean. It's like the film. It's lean, it's mean, and it looks pretty dangerous to me. It works. It works.
It does. I am not surprised one bit that the marketing was one of the main reasons that helped this succeed in the cinema. Because I was in, by this point I was living in London, been in London for ages, but I remembered it on all the buses. I remembered it on the tube. It was popping everywhere. We should talk a bit about the writer, Derek Kolstad. Yeah. Interesting guy. Interesting guy from what I could find out about him. There's some writer struggles that I felt were very they hit pretty close to home as I was reading about his own struggles as a writer.
Absolutely. I think we both feel them.
Yes. So he really struggled as a writer, as most of us do and are doing. He at one point he was producing up to like 8 screenplays a year, and none of them were taking off.
Yeah.
Which
I mean, you've got to admire that dedication. I mean, if there's one thing you can say about writers is the majority of us don't do it for the money. We do it because it's in us. It's part of us. And this fella must have that in spades,
He did stop. He's
only
stopped
human.
Pursuing it professionally for a while. But
he's only human after all.
Yeah, but his wife was like, "Look, I think you need to keep at it." And that's the thing. Like, the industry annoys me, and I'm not going to go on a massive tangent about this, but like the whole like it's luck sort of stuff. It's frustrating because there's so many talented people who deserve the work and aren't getting it. As if there's not enough work to go around when there definitely is. It's just greedy money bag holding POSs who run publishing companies and studios that don't want to they want that surefire risk, hits, riskless BS of a comic book movie. But anyway, so I'm so pleased that his wife encouraged him to keep going. And apparently, I don't know if this is like another Rocky situation, I wrote Rocky in a day. But apparently over like 4 or 5 days, he wrote the spec script for John Wick, which at the time was titled Scorn. And, possibly, I mean, there's a lot of action, so maybe there's a lot of pages, big action scene.
Yeah,
big action scene.
I mean, there's not a lot of dialogue, is there? Again, what dialogue you get is just what you need. There's no dialogue excess in this. So I can imagine. I mean, I suspect it was very rough, as
probably
first drafts always are. And I suspect you're right. I think he might have just, you read about scripts, don't you, that they just say there is a chase, They leave it for, or there is a fight, and they say, we'll fill in how good it looks later on. I suspect there was a fair bit of that going on in this. Wick does something that looks cool but is terrifying. That can apply to a lot of scenes in this. So I can believe it. I can believe it, and he obviously knew what he wanted. He knew what his the general setup of the film was going to be, and how it was going to play out. I think he must have known a good idea of that because he's worked at it. I think he's worked at it. So I can believe that. I have to say I can believe that he churned it out in a couple of days, on the basis that it wouldn't have been ready and it wouldn't have been as good as it is.
Yeah, I can see it happening. I mean, there are people who are very fast writers and they can get a lot done in a few days, whereas I am a slow one. It irritates.
Barbara Cartland used to write something like a book a day or something, but if you've ever read one, you can see why.
Yes. Now, people always talk about wanting an old Bond movie, right? Interesting, that is kind of what he was going for with this initially. So the script in its first inception was about a retired hitman in his 60s to 70s. Sort of, I guess, like to what's that Bond? Never Say Never Again. So old Bond coming back, sort of situation. And in his mind, he sort of modeled the actors on people like Clint Eastwood and Paul Newman.
Yeah.
Which I thought was really cool, and I like that. I really when I think about John Wick in that sense, like, oh wow, like this 70-year-old hitman coming out to do some damage, like that is so cool. And I don't know why we don't like properly get that movie. Like in general.
I mean, Unforgiven is one that sort of occurs to me. So it's interesting that he did have Clint Eastwood in his mind. I wonder if that film was in his mind, because that essentially is the old expert coming back for one last mission. But yeah, I mean, I do think they should do it with Bond. I think it'd be, and I think they should get Timothy Dalton back to do it. I think it'd be ace. But I would have quite liked to have seen it. I would have quite liked to have seen John Wick as the 60-odd-year-old coming back. That's. I mean, it's an old idea, isn't it? It's an idea that's been done before. I mean, Dark Knight Returns is one of where an old Batman comes back. But it's a good idea. It's a nice idea. There's a film with Michael Caine called Harry Brown where he's an old pensioner on a London estate who is sick of all the yobs and everything, and goes on a bit of a rampage. And it is interesting to watch, because there's a peril to it, because you think, well, he's never going to be able to stand up to these physically. So what's he going to do? And of course, what he's got is the brains as well as the brawn, and the old training kicks in and all that. It is interesting to see, and I think this could have been it would have been a different film, perhaps, but it would have been an interesting one.
I would have loved it, I think, but I'm happy with this. I'm happy with the John Wick that we got, and I think Keanu Reeves. He's a really good balance of. I mean, he's far from what I would call like old. He's not an old guy, but he's seasoned. He's So it worked in that sort of like in between young, old. He's right slap dab in the middle of what could work. And I think that was probably a really good idea. But there were some interesting choices up for John Wick. Stallone, Dolph Lundgren. Jean-Claude Van Damme.
I mean, what are we thinking there?
Right. Bruce Willis, that sort of makes sense. I can see that. Kurt Russell.
I can see Kurt Russell.
Nick Cage. This isn't a Nick Cage movie. This is not a Nick Cage movie.
This would have been called Nick Cage if Nick Cage was
It would have been. Kevin Costner. I
think would have been interesting. I think he would have been interesting. I'm not saying he would have been as good as Reeves turns out to be, but the question is whether you could buy him as a hitman and essentially a villain and he's too often the hero for me to be. I think he brings some baggage with him.
I can buy him as a villain, but I mean, as in, or as a sort of gray character, mainly because from like his character in Yellowstone. There's some shady stuff that happens in Yellowstone. And I'm like, okay, so I could see him as maybe, but it just would have been a very tonally very different vibe.
It would have been quite different, yeah.
Quick ones. Go on.
Well, no, I'll just go and finish the list because it'll strengthen the point I'm about to make, I think.
Yeah. Okay. So the last few: Johnny Depp, Jason Statham.
Of those, the only ones I think I would, in an alternate reality, want to see is Kurt Russell and Bruce Willis. To be quite honest, they're the only ones I think could pull off anywhere near what the intention would have been.
Yeah. I have to agree. No one else on this list really inspires, but again, I think I'm glad this was Keanu Reeves again, because he wasn't having hits, and it was nice to see him come back and do a string of hits, because he didn't do just one John Wick. I mean, John Wick has become his new Matrix. He is knocking them, out every couple of years now, it seems.
Yeah.
But it's
and is that not proof that he was right for the role?
Yeah.
Because people don't repeatedly go and see a film where they don't think that the actor is right in the part, and I think he is great in this. He looks seasoned because he has aged. In terms of, he's got older, but he doesn't look as if he's aged particularly. I don't know what his secret is, but
he's aged well for sure.
Yeah, but he looks like a man who has had a life and has turned his back on it to sort of live in anonymity, and
to live in anonymity with his same name.
with his same name, yeah.
Okay, though, I'll accept it.
But I have this thing about casting unknowns. I also quite like the idea of casting. I don't really want to say a has-been, because I don't think he was a has-been, but someone who's not had a hit for years, who's sort of slightly disappeared from the public conscience, coming back with such a blast is really satisfying. And as with the unknown thing, you buy him as John Wick because you've sort of not seen him for a while, so he's come back as this person rather than as Keanu Reeves in a film, sort of thing.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, he's also one of those actors that I find quite versatile, where I can watch him in something quite cheesy like Chain Reaction, or I can watch him in Matrix or Speed or this, and he is one of those actors that whatever that role is who he is. So I don't see him in this. I don't see him, oh, this is Matrix. I don't see him or in something else, but oh, this is Speed. Like he's that caliber of actor who can just he becomes that role, and I see him as that role. I don't see Keanu Reeves entirely. I used to say the same about Robert Downey Jr., but Iron Man is just Robert Downey Jr., so now I just see.
Yeah. I know what you mean. Yeah, I know what you mean. He's a good character actor, and that's the phrase. He's a character actor.
Yeah.
And he becomes, and this is what all actors should do, isn't it? They shouldn't be just Robert Downey Jr. or
or
whoever
Nick
else
Cage.
you might want to say, or Nick Cage. They should become the person they're playing. But yeah, I think he's well cast in this role, and I think he pulls it off very well. I really do. And it's one of those where you, like a lot of roles that we've talked about on the show, if you try and imagine someone else in it, it's very difficult to do. Some roles it's impossible to do. And he's very much in that sort of sphere here. I can't imagine anyone as John Wick other than Keanu Reeves. And I think he's a good actor. I think he's been consistently a good actor. And I do think he gets just a slight tangent. I do think he gets, this is controversial perhaps, a bum rap for Dracula, for his accent in Dracula. Because I say, you tell me that Anthony Hopkins' accent in Dracula is any better, because it's not. And he's next to Carey Elways, whatever he's called, and he's next to Richard E. Grant, who are staunch British people. I think it's a bad accent, don't get me wrong, but it's not Dick Van Dyke by any means.
It's not, but also that Dracula film is...
that goes without saying.
So it's a bad accent in a bad movie that's trying to be a B movie, but also trying to be an A movie. It's just that yeah.
Its biggest crime is the title. If you were going to call the film Bram Stoker's Dracula, you better give me Bram Stoker's Dracula, and it doesn't.
Yeah.
Anyway, that's a different show.
That's a completely different topic. But so this film, I just felt like watching it was dripping with noir and noir references that I was loving. So like the opening of the movie begins in a very classic noir way where John he's injured and he's stumbling out of a car. Instantly, what came to my mind was Dead Reckoning and Double Indemnity.
Double Indemnity, yeah.
Where both of them have, Bogart in Dead Reckoning. They're both injured protagonists who then we then flash back and follow along with their journey back to that moment.
And even films like Murder My Sweet, where Marlowe starts with his eyes bandaged, and even in the Robert Mitchum version of the same novel, Farewell My Lovely, he says 2 weeks ago I wasn't holed up in a cheap hotel waiting for the police, and he has to then tell the story in flashback. That's it's a great noir trope. It's the classic first person narration in cinema.
It's also that we mentioned it briefly earlier, but he's happy, he's got a wife, but all of that gets taken away from him. And the wife, and I have to admire Derek, the writer of the movie, for subverting the tropes. And it's not the death of the wife that is the instigator, but it does fulfill the trope of, like, say the Big Heat, where losing the wife is a traumatic event for the protagonist and sort of, not ruins him, but sort of just devastates him to some degree. So I like that I like what they do with that and show his pain. I think there's sometimes we don't see, talking about the Big Heat in comparison, we don't really see David Banyan's pain per se.
No, we see his vengeance. We see his anger.
But here, that scene where John Wick goes driving along the runway at the airport.
Yeah, that's a great scene.
That is him getting his anger out, because he's a very he doesn't wear his emotions on his sleeve. He's a very sort of stoic, calm looking kind of guy. So, when he's driving recklessly and screaming in the car, like, that is him getting that stuff out. And I like that this film gave us these vulnerable moments with the protagonist, because I sort of get tired of action hero, even noir hero, who is so tough they're never in touch with their emotions. I think I like it when there is a bit of a emotional sprinkling for the protagonist.
Well, it makes them three-dimensional, doesn't it? It makes them seem like real people rather than just a cipher or a gimmick or a trope, whatever other sort of writing term you want to use. But yeah, and I like the way that he does it on his own. That driving down the runway it's a solitary way of expressing his emotion. And the cliche would be he's getting drunk in a bar, and telling someone about it, or moaning about it, or staring at a photo and remembering, or something like that. Because I quite like we don't get any flashbacks to it necessarily. He looks on his phone, I think. There's a few, but they're only brief.
Very brief.
In a lesser film, we'd have seen too much of it, I think. We'd have seen far too much of it. And I like the fact that he's not that sort of person, so he wouldn't do that sort of thing. So he gets in his car and just sort of drives towards a load of planes, whatever, and breaks at the last minute, and you think, God, that's absolutely right. That is exactly what he'd do, because bearing in mind what his job was,
yes,
he's not exactly a placid man, is he? So
no,
it's going to involve some rage. He's going to be angry about it. But you're right. He shows more emotion than Dave Banyan does, definitely. You're sort of left to assume that Dave Banyan has had his time of mourning, from one scene to the next, and has come out of the other side of it angry and vengeful. But it's nice to see John Wick, go through it,
Yeah.
and torment himself with it.
I also love his transformation from being that sort of sad figure to then going into revenge mode when he meets perchance meets these Russian gangsters who one of them, wants John Wick's car. John is going to give him to him. So they find John, they break into his house, trying to kill him, and they steal his car, but they also kill his dog. And that's what sets it off. And then they take the car to a dirty car shop run by a guy named Aurelio, played by John Leguizamo. And I just love that Aurelio's first comment is, "Where did you get that car?"
Yeah. Get it out of here quick.
Yeah. And then punches the guy, and they're like, "Oh my God, we're going to kill you." And he's like, go ahead, because you don't have any idea what you've just done.
Yeah. Absolutely. I love it. And I also like the fact that, the dog is sort of the motive. The death of the dog is the motivating factor for him to do it, and obviously it's sort of indicative of a deeper grief. It isn't the fact they've killed the dog; it's the fact that the wife had got in the dog.
Yeah,
but again, it's one step further than Dave Banyan. So I'm sort of processing the death of my wife, but now you've killed my dog. Well, that's it. I'm on it now. And it's a nice little touch. That it's a nice little again diversion from the norm. But it's brilliant when he starts, when he decides he's going to do it, and then he starts. It is a real sort of shuffle in your chair and say, right, we're off.
Yep.
And that's when the film kicks into gear and never lets up.
Yeah, no, it doesn't. Because the very first big action scene in John's house, was just phenomenal and brutal and visceral. I loved everything about it. But the thing I loved the most was after all this fighting, the doorbell rings, and it's a cop, and the cop's like, he's like, noise. John's like, noise complaint. He's like, noise complaint, and then the cop's like, are you working again? Because he can see a dead body down the house, and I can't remember what John's response is, but he's just sort of like, I don't know. It wasn't yes, but it was sort of like just stepping back in for a second or something along those lines.
Yeah, it's something like, I can't remember what it is, but it's something like that.
And then the cop's just like, well, I'll leave you to it, and then walks away.
He has a good line later on, John, when this, he says, he's sort of surrounded by the Russians, and he says, people were saying to me, "You thinking of coming back?" And I wasn't sure if I was going to come back, but now, do you know what? I am absolutely coming back. And you think, this is brilliant stuff. This is real sort of cheering and punching the air stuff.
Yeah, this is why, in terms of dialogue and stuff, there's a lot of cracking dialogue that you're just like, and it balances that action guy, stuff of I think, and I am back, and the well, I'll leave you to it. It balances that humor and that toughness. It's so well balanced in this movie that it just made it impossible to not love watching every scene.
And there's some great performances as well with some of this dialogue, because when Aurelio's he's called by Vigo, and who's the big Russian gangster, and he says, I heard you struck my son. And Aurelio says, yes, I did, sir. And he says something like, he stole John Wick's car and killed his dog. And Vigo goes, oh.
Yeah.
And that's the end of the conversation. Next thing you know, Vigo's battering his own son. It's brilliant.
So Vigo's son, who kind of instigates all of this malarkey, is played by Alfie Allen, who also is one of the main characters in Game of Thrones. And so when he came up, when we first saw him on the screen, we were like, oh my God, it's Reek from Game of Thrones. But in Game of Thrones, he also plays a similar sort of just frustratingly incompetent guy, someone who you just want to punch, basically.
Yeah, well,
he's not totally incompetent in Game of Thrones, but he's still someone you want to, who's been insufferable, and you want to punch him in the face.
Well, you want to punch him in this, don't you? Because he's just
God,
he's just a spoiled, horrendous character, isn't he?
Yes, but he does it. I'm saying this because he does it so well. Like I fully buy into him being this privileged SOB who just can walk up to some guy and start smacking his greasy ass hands all over his nice car, saying, "I'm going to buy your car."
Yeah.
Oh.
And he says to Vigo, "Let me do this, Dad. I can do it." You think you really can't.
Dad's punched him in the gut.
So, I mean, this film has got some good humor in it. It is funny in places. It's just that you've got to, there aren't sort of jokes, as there were. It's just funny. It's just funny that Vigo punches his own son for daring to think he could take on John Wick.
Yes. Or like also there's another scene where John comes back to the Continental Hotel, which I love the concept of the hotel in general, this sort of safe space for all of these assassins.
Yes. Like a refuge for gangsters.
Yeah. Where like here it's like, you can't participate in your criminal activities. You will be killed if you do. But I love that bit where John comes back to the hotel and he's covered in blood, and there's Lance. I gotta get his name right. Gosh darn it. Where is he?
Lance Reddick.
Yeah. It goes back to the hotel and Lance Reddick is there, who's playing Charon, who, if you know your Greek myths, is the one who ferries souls. So I love that. Yeah, and you got to pay him. You got to pay him the toll. So he pays him. But there's this scene where John Wick comes back all bloody, and he's like, "How good is your laundry?" And he's like, "I'm sorry, sir. Nobody is that good." Or like if that was done in like a Marvel film, you could just see it being like, doop, doop, doop. Like I just appreciate so much the balance of seriousness and levity, but like, having a serious conversation with like funny lines that aren't played for laughs but work humorously. You know what I mean?
Yeah, well, it's black comedy, isn't it? It's black comedy done very well, and there's a lot of it. There's a lot of. I think it'd be a mistake to say this film is just like dark and grim and violent. And there's a lot of humor in it if you go looking for it. It's really good.
Yeah, but I think you need that because again, this film is very violent, very, very dark, both kind of psychologically and and visually. That I think you kind of need those moments to breathe. And so I appreciate that they're just I love it. They're just kind of perfectly spaced out throughout the film to sort of give you those moments of I mean, even honestly, in some of the action, there's moments where the action is just so intense that you just sort of laugh at the action, not because it's bad, but because it's just the reaction is like, oh my God, I just gotta laugh because this is insane. Like,
well, absolutely. I was smiling and laughing throughout this, even though you could sort of say it's relentless and it's visceral and it's violent, but it's still quite funny. There's a scene where Vigo phones John and sort of says, let's just forget about it and just walk away and be civilized and all the rest of it. And John hangs up on him. And one of Vigo's sort of henchmen says, "What did he say?" And Vigo says, "Enough." And the henchman goes, "Oh God." I mean, that is genuinely funny. That is a funny exchange.
It is.
Without it being a signposted joke, without it being a sort of cheap gag.
It is. Now, I was, I mean, one of my favorite actors is Willam Dafoe. So we got to mention Willam Dafoe in this because I think he's absolutely wonderful. And when you watch this film the first time and Vigo goes to Dafoe, who is, character's name is Marcus, goes to Marcus to say, "Hey, I'm going to put a hit out on John Wick. Will you do it?" And he's like, "Yeah, sure." And you're like, "Oh no," because Marcus and John Wick are meant to be old friends, and you kind of buy it for a while. You kind of think, "Oh, they were friends, but like work comes first, and he's gonna do the job because it's the business, it's the nature of it, and he's gonna be betrayed by his good friend." And I mean, I legitimately thought he was going to go after John when I first saw this.
So did I. And I think that is because it's Willam Dafoe.
Mm.
He sells it because you can't read anything in Willam Dafoe's face in this until he wants you to read into it.
Yeah.
And I love the fact that it was an acting choice of Willam Dafoe's. That he's always like cutting up fresh vegetables or like drinking healthy drinks because he says he's an old fella, but he wants to keep up with the young ones, so in case he has to take one of them on. That's a perfect bit of actor logic, that is.
Yes.
And it comes across on the screen. He's always great as Willam Dafoe. He's always, even when he's chewing the scenery, he's chewing it because Speed 2 is a great example. He's chewing it for a reason, and that's either because he thinks the project needs it or deserves it or otherwise.
Yeah, he is fantastic, and he's perfect. He's perfect in this. And I mean, I love that scene, that very first scene that sort of gives it away that he's not going to go after John. And that, there's the scene where John has just come back to the hotel, he's dumped his clothes, but there is another person named Perkins, lady named Perkins, who is gonna break the rules of the hotel, and she's gonna sneak into John's room, and she's going to try and kill him because this bounty on John's life is huge. And there's three things I like about this scene, and one Keanu Reeves actually mentioned in some interviews is initially he was meant to be in his suit, but he said no, I would be in my pajamas, I'd be in my boxers, I'd be relaxing at this point. And so that's why he is like that. And he was also, it adds an element of vulnerability, because when John is in his suit, you're like, he means business, and he means business. But
it's like the bat suit, isn't it? And it's like it's like Bond's tuxedo. It's just, that's his armor. That's right. I'm on a mission now, sort of thing.
Yeah. So without that, you're like, that adds that vulnerability, which I loved. So you have that, but then you also have this like cool lady assassin coming, but then you also got this sniper coming, and just that shot right next to his ear, tipping him off to jump off the bed and then get the upper hand on the other bogey that's in the room.
Yeah.
So well orchestrated. Just perfect action.
It is. And it's intelligent action as well, isn't it? It's intelligent. It's not just a fight for a fight's sake. There's motivation behind it. And there's not like some cheap gag that means he knows to get out of the way. If it's like the bit, I always remember the bit in Goldfinger, even as a kid, where he sees the reflection in her eye of the bloke coming, but it's just cheap. It's just cheap. It would be so much better if he just got slugged on the back of the head and got up again and started fighting, But anyway, but this is that sort of hint to the main character, but done in a far better way, in a far more interesting way, because Willam Dafoe is an assassin. He's a sniper, so he's going to do it by sniper means. It all makes sense. It all fits into place from character to choreography to direction. It's all good stuff, and all the more rewarding for it.
Yes, and I was absolutely gutted when Marcus was killed, when Vigo went after Marcus in the end. So John ruthlessly tracks down Vigo's son, and I love the fact that there's no pomp and circumstance. He just walks up to him, pops him, and then walks away. There's no, you killed my dog, that was my wife. There's none of that. His mission is to find the guy and shoot him and walk away. And that's what happened in real life. You know what I mean? Movies spend too much time in books and stuff with these sort of exposition moments and these confrontation moments. And it's like, no, that is what would happen. And I love that they
like when people they're in a fight and they say, "That's for John," "That's for Billy."
Yeah.
If you've got time to say that in a fight, you're not in a proper fight, are you? So
no.
Yeah,
so
I love that. He just does what he has to do. No quip, no wink to the camera. Just job done, going home. That's fabulous, because that's the world that they live in. That's the world that he's existed in, and has been drawn back into. It's the same when Ms. Perkins pays the price for breaching the hotel etiquette.
Perfectly executed scene.
Absolutely, and I'm gonna do a shout out to Ian McShane as well, who is one of my favorites.
He was
He's
great.
ace in this.
Yeah, he's used
he's
sparingly, but the scenes that he's in are memorable.
Yeah, they are. He is used sparingly, but again, he doesn't outstay his welcome because he's not needed, is he? He's not needed a great deal. He's in the film when he needs to be, and what he does with the time he's got is make an impression, and that's a good cameo. That's the good sign of a cameo.
Sorry. What I was saying earlier is that I was also then kind of when I was trying to get to was that I was also then gutted when Marcus died. Yeah. Because Vigo. So this is what I love about John Wick. John Wick is so cool and calculated about going after Vigo's son, gets him, takes him out, and walks away. Vigo is not as emotionally centered. Is that the right way to describe it? So, he's very much torture. He wants to torture this. He wants to torture Marcus for one, but he also wants to hurt John more. And the way to hurt John more is for him to do the stupid thing, which makes sense, and call John and say, "I just killed your friend, you son of a gun." And I mean, ultimately that's going to send John on you. He's now going to come after you for doing that. But character-wise, it's one of those things. It all made sense to me, because it's like if he hadn't have called and said, John probably wouldn't have gone after him, because John might not have known. He probably would have figured it out, but he might have got away, possibly. But because he did this, because he's so angry because his son has just been murdered, and he knew it was, it all made sense logically for me as to why these things were happening.
It makes sense logically to me as well, in terms of the sort of mindset of people like this. These Russian gangsters are so far removed from the Russian gangsters in A Walk Amongst the Tombstones. These, I believe in these. These aren't just people in socks and sliders. I think we commented on in that episode. Vigo's way of life is to get revenge when he needs to get revenge, and he has to get revenge for his own son. Otherwise, it's a sign of weakness. That's what this way of life is for these people. Yeah. So, in a sense, it's a tragic flaw, isn't it? Because he has no choice other than to tell John Wick that he has got revenge for his son, because otherwise John might think he's weak. So he has to say it, even though he knows, in the best sort of Shakespearean tradition, that's going to bring an absolute tempest on him. Yeah. Except, but what he gets is John Wick.
Yeah, I mean that final action scene, that final chase by the docks, I loved it. It was so suspenseful, brilliant, but also so funny. Like when the lawyer's like, "Give me a gun, give me a gun." He's like, "Good luck." And then John just drives over him.
Yeah. But as you said before, he gets hurt, and he gets realistically hurt. I got the impression at the end. I always get the impression that he's sort of willing to succumb to his injuries.
There is a moment, definitely. Yeah, it feels that way.
Where he says, "That's it. I've done. No need to do any more, and I can just go now." And then survival instinct or whatever it might be kicks in, and and he doesn't. But that is a nice touch. That's a good character touch, and it's one that we almost never get, do we? We almost never see the hero in that position.
Not often. There are few films put the hero in that level of distress, and I think Wick one for sure, and the Bourne trilogy is another where you feel Bourne's pain and you feel Wick's pain for sure. Yeah. Blade Runner, I'd say Blade Runner is another where you feel Rick Deckard.
Oh yeah, there are films that do it.
I'd say on the whole, I think you're right. There's very, you don't feel Captain America is ever in pain. You don't feel Batman is ever in pain. You don't feel.
No, you see Batman stitch himself up,
Stallone,
and you see him all battered and bruised. I mean, nobody really, do they? Even when he's getting a tow rope between the legs, no one really believes that James Bond's not going to survive whatever he's going through. Yeah, and they can put some blood on his face and some bruises and stuff, and have him sort of act in pain, but there's never the sense that he thinks, "Well, I'll just lie down here now and die."
Yeah. I mean, John is stumbling around and falling over. Like he's on that point of losing consciousness, and that's that's the buildup. That is constantly building throughout the film. His injuries are persistent, and that's where a lot of action movies don't go that far with it, because it's too much work.
Well, it's too much work, or we don't know really how to present it convincingly. That means you can then have the character survive. Whereas, I don't feel that this is one where he should have died. I think I like the fact that it's just a moment's thought that he has, and then thinks, no, there's I've got to move on. And he say at one point, I thought I'd found a reason to go on living or something, and you took it away from me. And then he means the dog.
Yeah, he does. He says that when he's been captured, he was basically saying he had given up hope, and the dog was hope for him, and they took that hope away, and that's why he's just being.
That's right. Yeah, that's right.
Yeah,
and I wonder, I wonder if that's this is a sort of payoff for that he doesn't give in, and he won't give in even now. So he gets up.
Yeah. He gets up, he walks away, he finds another dog. He's found hope
another
again.
dog. Yeah, gets another dog.
So now I also have to highlight the Blade Runner ending. So you have John Wick, you have Vigo on the ground. Vigo's dying, and they're having their final kind of conversation while Vigo is dying, and it's pouring down rain. Very, very reminiscent of the ending of Blade Runner. There is no tears in the rain speech, but there is the "be seeing you," and then he drops his head. Very similar to the way Rutger Hauer, drops his head at the end of Blade Runner. And then,
it's impossible not to see it. It's impossible not to see it.
I'm like, this is Blade Runner, and I love it.
Yeah. And it's no one that must be intentional. It's just too close not to be.
It's got to be. It has to be. But yeah, I mean, this was interestingly one interesting bit of trivia is that the story about, the death of the dog is sort of based on a real event that happened. There was a Navy SEAL in Texas, apparently, who some dudes came onto his property, killed his dog, which I think the dog was named Daisy, maybe. Anyway, woke up, saw his dog's dead. He chased these guys through several counties until the police caught up with them. And apparently, there was some. The people who he were chasing, they were taunting him and all that kind of stuff. But that is one of the big, that kind of instigating moment in the movie is actually based on something that sort of happened in real life, which I found that a bit nuts, but also really interesting.
Yeah, I love stuff like that. I love stuff where there's a kernel of truth, however small that kernel may be, at the heart of it. I always think it adds a bit of texture to it.
And also, one other shout out with a little piece of trivia. I mean, these stunt guys are putting themselves through hell with these movies.
Yeah.
And one of the stuntmen for Keanu Reeves injured himself so badly that apparently his ear was resting on his shoulder. And they had to stitch it up with 80 some odd stitches. And I'm like, oh my God.
Like 87 stitches. Yeah. I read that too and just couldn't really give it enough brain space to compute what that must feel like. It was
oh my God. To imagine what your ear is like laying on your shoulder. Oh my God.
Move on. But yeah, it's a testament to people who are in that profession, I think, the dedication. In a very small, well, not a very smaller example of that sort of dedication is, I'm sure that like Reeves himself had flu during the course of this shoot, and
he did,
something like 104-degree temperature, and he insisted
plowed through.
He insisted that he plowed through. And they were filming I think they were filming a fight scene, and he was, what it's like when you.
Yeah,
like got a flu.
Yeah, was it one of the club scenes? I think it might have been one of the club scenes.
I think it might be the nightclub scene. I think it might be the night.
Yeah, I would have been like, I'm going to bed.
Yeah,
night, guys.
Yeah.
night guys.
Yeah, can't we just do a Raiders of the Lost Ark and shoot them?
Yeah, exactly.
This.
Yeah. Oh, I mean, dedication. I mean, I think this is what one of the big takeaways I took from this film is everyone, you could feel the dedication across the board. The writing was dedicated, the directing was dedicated, the cinematography was dedicated. Everything looked and sounded and was performed excellently, in my opinion. This is a wonderful neo-noir movie.
I agree. People talk about film being a collaborative exercise, and it is very much so, much more so than writing a novel, for example. And in this, it's so obvious that everyone was on it, and into it, because it pays off. It genuinely does pay off. You can tell. And I think the resulting film is really strong, really, really good.
On that note, should we rate this movie?
I'm happy to rate.
So if you're a first-time listener, we rate all of our films from 1 to 5 Falcons, 1 being the best. No, 1 being the worst, 5 being the best. Caught myself. So, Matt, you go first. What would you rate John Wick?
This is a strong 4.5 for me. A strong 4.5. I don't. It's really good. It's really strong. It's really well put together. It's well acted. It's well written. It's well staged. It's well lit. It's well photographed. But I don't know whether I can go the whole hog and give it a full 5 Falcons. I don't. I've no real sort of scientific reason for saying that, other than, I don't think it's a Chinatown necessarily. Sure. So yeah, I'm gonna. But that half a Falcon is really just a gut feeling more than anything else. It's not anything that I can't say this scene or that scene or anything like that. It's just I don't think it's close, but I don't think it's quite a 5. So a good strong 4.5 from me, and a high recommendation.
I am going to give it a 4.9. And I'm shaving off a little bit because for one very, very tiny microscopic nitpick, and that is when the guns are firing, they have a bunch of digital flares, and I didn't like the digital flares. If they aren't digital, they've been touched up digitally, and I didn't like that. So the gun flares annoyed me, particularly in the club scene and in the Russian bath scene. They just stood out to me, and I was like, not all guns pop like that. Like we just have the gun, just have the shot. We don't need to see the flash every time.
Yeah.
So
that's fair enough.
For that particular reason, it's just a small shaving. But ultimately, I mean, we've sung the praises of the movie this whole time. Everything about it is working very well. It's very entertaining. It's an hour and 40 minutes well worth your time. High praise from me and you for
high praise from me.
Go watch John Wick.
Yeah, definitely.
Well, that wraps up our investigation. Thanks for listening. We'll be back next week with another case. In the meantime, please like and subscribe, and be sure to take care walking down those mean streets.